By the end of that night, no punches were thrown, no winner was announced, and yet 3 reputations quietly shifted in ways the public would never fully see. Those who were present would later agree on only one thing. Whatever happened in that ring did not resemble a contest. It resembled a correction. The method was never discussed openly. Only the outcome remained, spoken in fragments, years later, by the 8 people who understood what they had witnessed. Those who were there would later struggle to describe the room without sounding as if they were diminishing it. It was not large. It was not dramatic. It did not resemble the places where reputations are usually tested. There were no banners on the walls, no photographers waiting for a moment, no raised platform to separate performer from observer. The floor was clean, bare, and practical. The lighting was sufficient, not flattering. It revealed posture, distance, and movement without offering anything to hide behind. This was intentional. The space had been chosen because it removed advantages that fame often provides. There would be no roar of approval to lean into, no boos to resist, no rhythm imposed by an audience's attention. Whatever happened here would unfold at the speed of reality, not spectacle. Those present understood this almost immediately. Conversations softened as people entered, voices lowered. Jokes that might have landed elsewhere simply drifted away unfinished. The room had a way of doing that, of narrowing focus without effort. There was an unspoken agreement among the 8 witnesses. Nothing said here would be repeated with precision, not because of secrecy demanded, but because accuracy would be difficult. The absence of ceremony made everything feel strangely personal. Observing felt intrusive, as if they were standing too close to something private. The ring itself, if it could even be called that, was modest. No ropes cut into the air dramatically. No corners announced dominance. It existed simply to define space, not to elevate anyone within it. Standing there did not make a man look larger. If anything, it reduced him to scale. Time moved differently in that room. Without cues, minutes felt longer. Pauses stretched. Even footsteps seemed louder than they should have been. People became aware of how they stood, where their hands rested, how often they shifted weight. Attention sharpened without effort. Nothing had begun, and yet something was already happening. The absence of noise allowed anticipation to settle into something heavier than excitement. It was not the energy of a crowd waiting for action. It was a tension of observation, of knowing that comparison was inevitable, even if no comparison was officially declared. One of the witnesses would later say that this was the moment when expectations began to fail. Not collapse, fail quietly. The room did not care who was famous. It did not respond to reputation. It offered no echo for confidence to bounce back from. This was not a stage designed to prove greatness. It was a room designed to reveal limits. And before anyone stepped forward, before anyone spoke directly, it became clear to those watching that whatever would happen next would not need to be explained loudly afterward. It would either stand on its own or not at all. The room was ready. They did not arrive together. That, too, mattered. Muhammad Ali entered first, with the ease of someone long accustomed to rooms reshaping themselves around him. He did not announce his presence. He never needed to. Years of public dominance had already done that work. Even in a space stripped of spectacle, the habits of recognition followed him in quietly. How people adjusted their stance, how attention bent without instruction. Ali's confidence was not theatrical here. It was contained, observant. He spoke lightly but not carelessly. Those who knew him well would have recognized his version immediately. Alert beneath the humor, measuring without appearing to. A short while later, Elvis Presley arrived with a different kind of gravity. His fame operated on another frequency entirely. Where Ali commanded attention through motion and voice, Presley's presence altered the emotional temperature of a room. He did not posture. He smiled politely, shook hands, and stood slightly apart, as if accustomed to being observed even when nothing was happening. Presley had been studying martial arts seriously for years by then. That fact was known among a small circle, often misunderstood by the public. He did not claim expertise, but he respected discipline. He watched more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was with curiosity, not challenge. Then came Bruce Lee. There was no shift in volume when he entered. No pause in conversation. No instinctive recalibration by the room. And yet, something subtle changed, not outwardly, but internally among those paying close attention. Lee did not carry himself like someone arriving to be evaluated, nor did he move like someone prepared to impress. His posture was neutral, efficient, no tension wasted, no looseness exaggerated. He acknowledged everyone briefly, without hierarchy, without deference, and without assertion. What distinguished him was not humility in the performative sense, but absence of friction. He did not push against the space, and the space did not push back. This difference did not go unnoticed. Ollie and Presley were men whose identities had been shaped, in part, by public reflection, by how crowds responded, how narratives formed around them. Lee operated differently. His authority, if it could be called that, seemed inwardly sourced. It did not require agreement. As the three stood within the same defined area, the contrast became impossible to ignore, not as a rivalry, not as a challenge, but as a study in how power expresses itself when stripped of amplification. No one announced a contest. No terms were spoken aloud. And yet, every witness understood the underlying question hanging in the room. It was not who would win. It was whose understanding would remain standing once comparison was no longer hypothetical. The room, indifferent as ever, waited. Nothing was agreed upon aloud. That was the first signal that this was not going to unfold like a contest. No rules were discussed. No boundaries negotiated. No one asked what was permitted and what was not. The absence of structure might have unsettled some rooms. Here, it clarified things. Without rules, there would be no loopholes to lean on. Only understanding would matter. The witnesses took their places naturally, without instruction, not seated, not formally arranged, just positioned where observation felt honest, close enough to see details, far enough not to interfere. The room accepted this configuration, as if it had been waiting for it. Ollie leaned casually against the edge of the defined space, hands loose, expression open. His posture suggested comfort, but his eyes were active. He was watching not for threat, but for rhythm, how weight shifted, how balance was kept, how attention moved before the body did. Presley stood slightly to the side, arms relaxed, gaze steady. He had the look of someone prepared to learn something, even if he did not yet know what that something would be. His breathing was slow, deliberate. Lee remained still, not rigid, not posed, simply still in a way that did not invite interpretation. His feet were placed with care, though not exaggerated. His hands rested where they fell naturally. There was no visible preparation ritual, no stretching, no signaling of readiness. That, more than anything, began to unsettle expectations. In most confrontations, public or private, there is a moment where intention becomes visible, a shift in stance, a tightening of shoulders, a glance that asks for acknowledgement. Here, intention remained internal. The room could not read it. Seconds passed, then more. The witnesses would later describe this interval as longer than it likely was. Without movement, time expanded. Each breath became audible, each micro-adjustment. Someone clearing their throat, a shoe scuffing lightly against the floor, registered more than it should have. Ollie broke the silence first, not with challenge, but with humor, a light comment, the kind that usually relaxed rooms. It landed politely and faded without changing the atmosphere. The room did not respond. Lee acknowledged it with a slight nod. No smile, no reply. This was not dismissal. It was precision. He was conserving something, not energy, but clarity. He was refusing to shape the moment with words that would need to be defended later. Presley noticed this. One of the witnesses recalled seeing him shift his weight subtly, as if recognizing that whatever he had expected to see was no longer applicable. The tension did not rise. It condensed. Without aggression, without posturing, a quiet hierarchy began to form, not of people, but of ideas. Speed versus timing. Strength versus alignment. Familiarity versus adaptability. No one moved into the space yet, but the question had already narrowed. It was no longer about whether something would happen. It was about how little would be required to end the uncertainty. And in that narrowing silence, The room seemed to lean forward, not in anticipation, but in acceptance. When it happened, it did not announce itself. There was no step forward that signaled intent, no shift dramatic enough to register as the beginning of action. One of the witnesses would later say that they missed the exact moment it started, not because they were distracted, but because nothing about it resembled a beginning. Lee moved only when movement became unavoidable. It was brief, measured, almost disappointing to anyone expecting spectacle. He did not face either man squarely. Instead, he adjusted position by a fraction, just enough to alter distance, just enough to redraw lines that had previously felt stable. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like repositioning. To those watching closely, it was a recalibration of reality. Ali responded instinctively, not with force, but with readiness. His hands lifted slightly, not to strike, but to acknowledge proximity. In boxing, this was a familiar language. Distance is conversation. Timing is grammar. Lee did not answer in that language. What followed was not an exchange. There was no back and forth, no escalation. A single sequence unfolded, compact, controlled, almost clinical. It ended before it could develop into anything recognizable as conflict. No blow landed. And yet, Ali's balance was gone. Not taken violently. Not forced. Simply removed. For a fraction of a second, his structure no longer supported his intent. He caught himself immediately, too skilled not to, but the interruption had already occurred. The room absorbed this without reaction. Presley saw it clearly, not as a fan, not as an observer of personalities, but as someone who had spent years trying to understand martial discipline. What unsettled him was not what Lee did, but what Lee did not do. There was no excess, no attempt to dominate beyond necessity, no follow-through designed to impress. Lee stepped back to where he had been. The space reset. No one spoke. Ali did not laugh this time. His expression did not change dramatically, but something behind it recalibrated. He had not been challenged. He had been shown a boundary he had not previously mapped. That was the demonstration. Not a technique displayed for admiration. Not a lesson explained. Simply an interruption placed with perfect economy. Enough to answer the question. Not enough to provoke defense. Those watching understood immediately that repeating it would be pointless. The outcome would not improve with volume or speed. It had already arrived at its conclusion. Lee offered no commentary. He did not wait for acknowledgement. He did not seek agreement. His body language suggested closure, not continuation. The room exhaled, not audibly, but collectively. What had been uncertain was no longer so. And because nothing dramatic followed, because no one pressed forward to reclaim status or save face, the moment settled into something more permanent than victory. It settled into understanding. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was resolved. The silence that followed was not empty. It was occupied by recalculation. Ali straightened slowly, not because he needed to, but because habit demanded posture return order. He did not test the space again. He did not step forward to reassert rhythm. The instinct to respond was there, but it had nowhere useful to go. What had occurred did not invite a rematch. It invited recognition. Presley remained still, eyes focused not on Lee now, but on the place where balance had briefly failed. He was tracing the absence, not the action. For him, this was not about who could do more, but about how little had been required. Years of practice, of forms and repetitions, quietly rearranged themselves in his mind. Lee did not look at either man for a moment. He adjusted his stance as one might after finishing a simple task, returning tools, clearing space. There was no satisfaction visible, no restraint forced for appearances. The lack of emphasis was itself instructive. One of the witnesses would later say this was a point where the room truly changed. Not earlier, during the movement, but now. After, when no one rushed to fill the quiet with explanation. Confidence, when unchallenged, is expansive. Here, it had contracted, not into insecurity, but into precision. Ali spoke again, softly, not to reclaim ground, but to acknowledge it. His tone was respectful, almost curious. There was no bravado to soften the moment, no humor to redirect attention. He was addressing an understanding, not a person. Lee replied briefly, not with instruction, not with philosophy. A simple clarification, offered without emphasis, enough to close the loop. Presley nodded once. That gesture carried weight. He had spent years navigating rooms where admiration distorted learning. This was different. Here, learning had occurred without permission being asked. No one suggested continuing. No one proposed testing variations. The question had been answered in the only way it could be, without escalation. Anything further would have been indulgence. As they moved away from the defined space, the hierarchy that had existed when they entered did not return. Fame did not reassert itself. Roles did not snap back into place. The room had recorded something more durable than status. What unsettled the witnesses most was how quickly normality resumed. Jackets were adjusted. Small talk returned, cautiously at first. The world did not pause to acknowledge what had happened. And yet, something essential had shifted. Confidence, when stripped of assumption, reveals its foundation. In that room, one foundation had proven conditional. Another had proven sufficient. No one left feeling diminished, but no one left unchanged. The lesson did not announce itself. It simply refused to be forgotten. Years passed before the story surfaced at all. And when it did, it arrived incomplete. There were no dates attached to it, no precise location offered. The accounts differed slightly, not in substance, but in framing. Each witness remembered the same silence, the same interruption, the same absence of spectacle. What varied was what they understood it to mean. Ollie would later speak often about speed, timing, and intelligence in combat. Occasionally, in quieter moments, he would allude to encounters that taught him restraint rather than dominance. He never named the room. He never described the sequence. Those who recognized the reference did not press him for detail. Presley's transformation was more visible, though no explanation accompanied it. His approach to martial arts deepened, then simplified. He spoke less about power and more about awareness. Friends noticed the shift long before they heard rumors of its origin. As for Lee, he never confirmed the story. He never denied it either. When asked about demonstrations, he spoke only in general terms, about efficiency, about adaptation, about the danger of mistaking performance for understanding. He offered no anecdotes. He did not need to. The 8 witnesses shared an unspoken agreement that precision would weaken the story. To explain exactly what happened would invite comparison, imitation, and argument. The moment had not been about technique. It had been about clarity under pressure. Over time, the story became something else. Not a tale of challenge, but of alignment. It survived in fragments, passed quietly among practitioners, musicians, fighters, people less interested in outcomes than in foundations. Its power lay in what it refused to dramatize. No one in the story was humiliated. No one was crowned. And because of that, the lesson endured. The room itself no longer exists. The space has been repurposed, its floor replaced, its walls repainted. Nothing marks what occurred there. No plaque, no photograph, only memory. And memory, when carried by those who understand its weight, does not need detail to remain intact. What happened that night was never meant to be repeated. It was meant to be recognized, not as a victory, but as a moment when understanding spoke once, and did not need to speak again.